by the time those tragedies happened and we had more care, we had nannies. Derry had a nanny. I had a nanny. And my nanny's name was Miss King, but of course we just called her King, just like Lawrence Sprague, we called Sprague. You called people by their name. Miss King lived in Wyoming, not the state of Wyoming, but the county Wyoming, which was very hilly. And every once in a while, when she was no longer with us, we would go to visit her in her house in the town of Wyoming. She lived in a house on the side of a very steep hill. And let me tell you what I learned about houses that were built on hills then. She lived over her farm. There was a part of her barn underneath her house, and there were animals would go and be safe. That was their barn, and she lived in a house on top. That was the first time I ever saw an outdoor potty. Greycliff never had an outhouse, and at Miss King's there was an outhouse. Well, that was an eye-opening experience for me. There was another hill that made an impression upon me, and it was close to, it was called Lakeview, and it had a deep ravine where several of the hills, which we didn't have hills. Everything was perfectly flat at Greycliff, but there were hills in Lakeview, and you had to go down in your car and over a wire or an iron bridge, and then up the other side. Now, I was old enough at that point to be very aware of cars. My car in particular. We went down the hill and we crossed the bridge and we started to go up, and the car failed. I don't know why, but we had to back down that hill. And I remember that. I was petrified that the hill would go off and we'd be swept off this country road. But we weren't. And I'm sure that probably modern day has put a bridge over the top of this community. It was fun. And I remember the little one-room schoolhouse. We started there because I went to school at the Elmwood School in Buffalo. And my brother did too. And for some reason, I think I know, it was the polio season. And school did not open on time, so we went to the little country school, and it was not far from the driveway that took you up to Greycliff.
Oh.
And it was, I don't know if it's still there or not, but it housed not many families, and so we went to school there for until the polio season was not so frightening and we could go into Buffalo. My brother and I liked cars. We liked making noises like and we pretend that we were in cars. In the field next to the drive that took us up to Greycliff was the old shell of a car. Oh. It had seats and it had a floor gear shift. And that was about all. There was no side, no top, no nothing. A hood, probably. And Derry and I would pretend to be driving. Go into second gear. And we play there by the hour. It was also on the way to greet my father, who would be coming out from Buffalo. And then we'd stay down there until his car came up the drive, and then we'd go and climb in, go up there.
Would he come out in a Pierce Arrow? What did he drive?
No, he didn't. Things were tough then, and I think I'm not sure. I think it was a Graham, if there was such a car, a Graham. And I think it was red. But that was our experience out in the fields. There was also a place where wild iris grew, and I always wondered if the wild iris were at one time a part of some house where somebody had put bulbs there was nothing there except these wild iris, but they were sort of as if they had been a planned garden. I always liked them. So flowers were important, sunshine, freedom, singing, birds. Oh, and then the family had a friend, and I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, but he was head of the zoo in California, San Francisco. And he came for a visit once, and he had a bag, and inside the bag were snakes. And so, well, I learned to not be afraid of snakes, because he would stand at one end and have Derry or me stand at the other end of this long rope, and then he'd take out the snake and have it run along the rope. And I mean, with somebody doing that in a controlled situation, you weren't afraid of them. But they were big snakes, like, that size. And, which reminds me, we had outside of the stairs of Foster House was a little garden, and my mother called it the Rose Garden because she had lots of roses in there. But it also had, what bordered the Rose Garden were big round rocks. And the snakes would come and sun themselves on the rocks, so that I was not afraid of snakes.
Yeah.
I grew up not afraid of things in nature, and that's wonderful today. I never saw movies that had monsters. As I say, I just was kept from that.
Tell me about Dusty and Rusty. Who were Dusty and Rusty?
Oh, Dusty and Rusty. Oh, that was interesting because, and I can't tell you the age, but it was when you couldn't get gasoline.
The rationing.
And everything was rationed. I remember needing shoes. But anyway, we couldn't get the gas for the lawnmower, which was a big lawnmower. We couldn't get the gas. And then the next thing I knew was my parents had gotten 2 lambs. And we called them Rusty and Dusty. And they were put in a large cage, like these fences, these wire fences. And then they would eat the grass. Then, when they finished one patch, they'd move the fence. And the grass was trimmed by those lambs. Now, when I went back into Buffalo for school, I don't know what happened to Rusty and Dusty. Probably went for a leg of lamb, I don't know. But that was a novel way of making do with difficulties. Also, once I remember being at the dinner table in Grey Cliff. It was on a Sunday, I guess, and we got a telegram from London, England. Could we take their children, 3 children from family, distant relations, in the Reed Path family? The Germans were bombing London, and they lived in Croydon, which was a suburb of London. And the children were all taken to big estates and so on like that for safety, so they would be out of harm's way. Could we take 3 children? And of course we said yes. Now, how they got here obviously was by ship, but I don't know who paid for the ship. I don't know anything about that. But I know there was one girl named Jillian, and she was my age. And then there was Jeffrey, and he was older, and he liked flying. And then there was June. June was the oldest and always wanted to be a nurse. So they lived with us for one summer, and Jeffrey looked into joining the Air Force, Canadian Air Force, because we were right across from Canada. And Jillian stayed with me, and June went off with Aunt Laura and Uncle George, and they lived in a place called Stawbridge. I'm not sure about that name. In Connecticut or Massachusetts, I think it was Massachusetts. But anyway, they had never had any children, so they ended up by taking all 3 children. And Jillian married a doctor, or she was a doctor, I'm not sure which, and she lives in South Africa. But she was my age, so that was lovely. I enjoyed that. And the next door was a family that had a child. They didn't have a child, they had a relative came to spend the summer. And that relative was from Houston, Texas.
Oh.
I didn't know anything about Texas, but that it was hot down there. And she came and stayed with grandparents up next door to where we were. So there was Jillian and this girl, and I can't remember her name, and myself, and we got into all kinds of exploring situations and going down the dugout, and just, we were clever enough so that we would make certain areas our home and play in the shrubbery and so on. But it was a happy time.